This is Current Reflections, a production of Tribal College, Journal of American Indian Higher Education.
For this installment of Current Reflections, we are joined by the President and CEO of the American Indian College Fund, Cheryl Crazybull. I'm Bradley Shreve. A member of the Sikangu Lakota Oyate with more than 40 years' experience in American Indian education, Cheryl Crazybull began her tribal college career in 1981 at Sintegleshka College on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. There she served in a variety of roles, including as Director of Women's Projects, Dean of Instructional Programs, and eventually as Vice President. In 2002, she was named President of Northwest Indian College in Bellingham, Washington, where she served until taking the helm at the College Fund in 2012. Besides her experience as a longtime tribal college leader, Dr. Crazybull is also the author of numerous articles, including essays on trauma and healing in Native communities. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Crazybull, and we're honored to have you here today to discuss our current theme, which is trauma and healing.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you.
So how does trauma manifest itself in individuals and communities?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Brad, for focusing on this really important part of Indigenous people's lives. I thought, oh, how does trauma manifest itself? And I'll try to be concise. I think there's the experience that Indigenous people have had for centuries has created an environment where we have a disconnect from our emotions. So we're often unable to name the emotions that we're feeling, and we might default, to the sort of basic, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, and not be able to explore all the other emotions that we have. So then that contributes then to our inability to make good decisions and to identify the choices that we might have. So I think that in the communities that I'm from and the communities that we serve, we really see that instability then in an individual's in the way that they can participate and show up as an individual and in their families. And then I also, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit more. It's a systemic trauma shows up in systemic ways in our communities. And so individuals end up really struggling to identify how to participate with and shift the way the systems show up or don't show up to support them. And so, it's just a really hard topic, I think, because we're talking about ourselves as Indigenous people. And, I'm talking about myself, I'm talking about my loved ones, I'm talking about the broader Indigenous community. And just the ways that it shows up is just such breadth and depth. It's almost hard to identify the specifics of it. So that's why I kind of tried to narrow it down to a few things that I see.
Yeah. So as noted earlier, you've been a part of the tribal college movement since 1981. How have conceptions of trauma and healing changed over the past 40 years?
I think one of the really important things that we know is now we're able to name it. So we're able to talk about how colonization has impacted us. We're able to speak to the trauma associated with the boarding school experience. We're able to talk about how we have a lack of access to quality health care and housing, or to living wage employment. And I think 40 years ago, we were focused on establishing ourselves as tribally controlled institutions and kind of navigating that system. But now I see us being really able to recognize in a more public, more inclusive way how we're impacted as individuals and in our families. I also think that we're more able now to make the connection between the healing that can happen and the resources that are needed for that healing. I think was actually in a conversation earlier today about how 40 years ago there were in our communities a limited number of sundances, which are a place where you can be healed and reinforce your wellness. And now we have many more places where people can go. So we've seen over the last 40 or 50 years just how that access to those cultural resources has increased. And then, of course, through education, we're able to name the experiences that we have. And, I think the other thing I would say about that is that we're also able to see the impact of the termination and relocation, and then the impact of legislation and court decisions, and how those kinds of sort of policy and institutionalized approaches to our lives impact our wellness. And so when I think of trauma, I think of the other side of that, which is how can we access healing and how can we access traditional knowledge for that.
Okay. And so in confronting trauma, what role can and should tribal colleges and universities play?
That's so important, because I think tribal colleges and universities are one of the places where we have access to systemic approaches that can be used to help people with their wellness, to help people have access to choices, make better decisions for themselves. Because I think the tribal colleges, they build in that's part of our work, is to build in that access to traditional resources, to build in the kind of healing pathways that occur. So, I know, for example, students have shared with me over the years how they took a class in, Indian history, and that was really traumatizing for them because they were able to name kind of the colonization and the establishment of the reservation systems and all those kinds of things. But they were also able then to access their family members and their peers, access traditional people in their community to give them the support that they needed in order to navigate that. And I think in the past, that support didn't exist. If you had a traumatic experience with education, there wasn't support there to help you navigate that. But I think with the tribal colleges, they're able to do that. I think the tribal colleges, it's a real important that we recognize and continue to mediate culture. And one of the things that I realized in my many years as an educator is that growing up, I participated with and lived as a Lakota person. And nobody said to me, oh, this is what Lakotas do. But now I realize that because of the influence of, more access to media and more mobility, and because of the institutions that have contributed to our trauma through their lack of resources and things like that, I realize that now we have to tell people this is what we do as whatever indigenous peoples you are. This is how we deal with grief, or this is how we deal with trauma. This is how we rebuild families. These are our resources because of those kind of other influences. So I think TCUs have a very important place with that. And I also look at the experiences that people have with schools. I believe that in order to address some of the challenges that we face in our community, we need to work with early childhood education, and we need to work with the K-12 systems. And I think tribal colleges are a conduit to helping those systems kind of access our traditional knowledge and our cultural ways of being, and access the resources that we need to strengthen families and to build individual self-determination and confidence. So I think tribal colleges have an important role like that. And then if you think about the fact that trauma comes from a systemic experience, we also have the capacity through our students and our graduates to change the systems. I've been thinking a lot about this, and how do you empower our students and our graduates to move towards systemic change. I know, like President Borda used to talk about tribal government reform, but I think of it more broadly than that. And I think, in kind of some of the same ways he thought of it, but I think, housing doesn't have to be the way it is. Housing could, in fact, be different. People could be able to access better homes, but you need to change the system to do that. And I like to think the tribal colleges, that our students and our graduates have done that and can do that even more.
Okay. And, you've kind of touched upon this, but from your observations and experiences, what are some of the most effective ways or strategies to begin the healing process?
I do think that a lot of it has to start with the personal. I think we have to make individual choices. I often think back to my late grandma auntie Edna Little Elk, who used to say that, leadership starts in the home and starts with you. And so I do think that, as hard as it is, that we need to support young people and people of all ages making better personal choices. And that's just tough to do because the system is so, kind of fraught with obstacles and challenges. But, making that first step toward your wellness, not choosing not to do drugs or not to drink, or choosing to find the resources to quit. Because I know that, and I don't mean that people are voluntarily, entering into addictive behaviors. I know that there's a physiological component to that, but just being able to make that first step and to persist with that, I think, is really important. I also think systemically we can do healing informed family supports, healing informed education, healing informed health. It takes an investment, and it takes us bringing in people who have the expertise and the knowledge, but I believe in us. I believe that we're capable of accessing those things and bringing them to our communities and to people. And I think through the education path, that's really important way to do that. And of course, I also believe that people should have access to a living wage. And so I believe that we can do better with our economies. I think it's a challenge, but I think if, tribal college students and graduates and their families can step up and try to navigate that system, I'm all for us supporting that and finding a way to help with that.
Cheryl Crazybull is the president and CEO of the American Indian College Fund. We'll continue with our discussion on trauma and healing in just a moment.
Yate, this is Marvin Tom, the advertising coordinator for the Tribal College Journal. Since 1989, TCJ has earned a loyal following of readers who are passionate about American Indian education. Our dynamic media outlet reaches a diverse, wide-ranging market, including students, educators, and lawmakers. And here's the best part. TCJ offers a variety of reasonable price advertising options that can be placed in our magazine, on our website, or right here in our Current Reflection podcast. For more information, contact me at 970-764-4238 or at marvin@travelcollegejournal.org. Yeah.
This is Current Reflections, and I'm talking with Cheryl Crazybull, the president and CEO of the American Indian College Fund. For Native students and Native communities, do you think that tribal colleges are better suited and equipped to address trauma and healing than mainstream institutions? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think there's tremendous power in us being able to use our knowledge and our own, what I would call our own personal authority or our own agency, our own self. We have that when others don't have it. Other institutions don't have it. A lot of times government systems, mostly they don't have it. So I do think that there's a lot to be said for that power. There's also that healing is about connection and relationships. And so I do think that when, tribal colleges are rooted in spirituality and rooted in relationship, rooted in our values as Indigenous peoples. And so I think there's a lot of authority associated with that. And that can be a resource that we use then to support and motivate and, be there for others. So yeah, I think we're really well suited to do that. And I actually think if there's a lack of doing it, it's just because it takes resources to do it. But I see the different things that tribal colleges are doing, from gathering in drum circles to feeding people to bringing in, traditional healers to lighting a fire, to praying with whatever their people pray with. I think that there's all kinds of ways that tribal colleges are bringing that access to students. Then they in turn, build that access for their families and for their broader communities.
Okay, thanks for that. So what are some of the differences between Western and Indigenous conceptions of trauma and healing?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of Western approaches involve fixing a piece of yourself and may involve counseling services or medication or some combination of that. And I think for Indigenous peoples, it's important for us to be able to access those things, but we're able to go more deeply into how are we connected to the rest of creation and how are we connected to the land. I think in order for us as Indigenous peoples to be well, we need to have back keep our connection to place, our connection to the land, our connection to the rest of creation, our connection to water, all of those kinds of parts of the rest of creation are important to our wellness. So I think that that's a huge difference, right? Is that we have that deeper ability to connect at that level. And then I think as Indigenous peoples, we recognize that it's about our spirit and the wellness of our spirit. So even though we may have to access some contemporary tools like medication or like a counselor, we know that it's our spirit we're trying to take care of. We're nurturing and holding close ourselves. So it's almost like we can't separate that. our spirit from creation, from our physical self. Whereas I do think, not all, but, some of the Western approach is to separate all those things and try to heal that piece of you. And so I was thinking about that in terms of how do people try to be well, because in our communities right now, there's an incredible amount of sadness, and I know that sometimes people don't have hope, but I think that if you turn to our traditional ways, you can find healing for your sadness, and you can be inspired toward hope. And so I look upon, like, even with grief, for example, which is often very traumatic for people, we have ways of being around grief as Indigenous peoples. Each tribal peoples have their own ways of being around it, but if you use that, then it will help you navigate that really was often a very traumatic experience in our communities. Or if you look to traditions like celebrating or honoring something that's happening, that can help you overcome your trauma. So maybe you went to boarding schools, or your parents went to boarding school, and you don't know what are appropriate ways to express love and affection. And so I believe that you can turn to your traditional knowledge, which gives you guidance for how to express love and affection. And you don't have to fall back on, the trauma that was caused by your boarding school experience. So I just like to believe that we as Indigenous peoples, we have all the teachings we need that can help us. And we need to be able to turn to the tribal colleges, turn to tribal educational institutions, health systems, all of those things to help us access that in today's society.
Okay, and addressing trauma and healing can be a very difficult, stressful, and sometimes even perilous thing. So for younger TCU leaders, administrators, faculty, staff, what advice can you give them?
Oh, so my advice is you should be willing to practice your own self-care. That kind of be good to yourself, be willing to reach out for support, be open to grounding yourself in your own healing practices. I am a deeply spiritual person, and prayer has been a source of advice, because I feel like the Creator gives advice to us when we sit for me, when we sit in place. For some people, it's like when they're active, maybe they're taking a hike, or they're out on a canoe, they're doing something that puts them close to creation and close to the land and water, and then they get the healing that comes from that. Some people get it from giving back to their community, and they are healed and are able to take care of themselves because they're doing things like feeding the community or showing up at community events. Maybe it's even just like a fun run or something, and they're there participating with that, and they get healed from that. Maybe it's going to your traditional ceremonies, and making sure that you take care of that. I think one of the hardest things for us is that we have so much to give to our communities that sometimes we don't remember that we also need to take care of ourselves in order to be able to do that, right? So to create that kind of healthy environment for ourselves, it's hard to do, but I think we have to do it, or people will get exhausted by it, and they won't have inside of them the spiritual and emotional resources that they need to share with others. So that's my encouragement, is that also I think, as I'm getting older, I realize that I am still learning. And I think if you're in a role like you're sharing, there are people who work in the tribal college movement. I think we should remember that we can always learn and still look to that as a way to practice our own wellness and our own healing.
Yeah. Well, great. This has been really insightful and helpful too. So I just want to thank you again for joining us here on Current Reflections.
Thank you.
Great. Well, you have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you at some event sooner or later.
Yeah, you will. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Current Reflections is a production of Tribal College, Journal of American Indian Higher Education. Thank you for listening.
No da trachin slow and sheen bashes chain, but any dash che taban dash nulle. I am Marvin Tom, the subscription manager for the Tribal College Journal. Today, tribal colleges and universities are uplifting Native communities, and Tribal College Journal is their voice. So don't hesitate, subscribe to the Tribal College Journal today and help support American Indian higher education. For just $29, you will receive our quarterly publication plus the annual edition of TCJ Student, which features creative writing and art. It is as easy as a quick phone call or email. You can reach me at 970-764-4238 or at marvin@tribalcollegejournal.org. I look forward to hearing from you. Ahiya.